Oh, goody.
All right, what's up, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Mercenaries video. So this one, doing something a little bit different. So if you don't know, XR does some AMAs here and there, and we got some questions answered. And this one in particular, I thought was really kind of worth diving into a little bit more because it gives some information on a question that has been at the forefront of everybody's mind since pretty much the beginning of Mercenaries, which are, when are these kind of big changes that we've been waiting for coming? So in the beginning of the year, we kind of got some information saying, hey, we know you've all been waiting for the excess coins, the PvE endgame, all that kind of stuff, and it'll be coming later on in the year, but we haven't really heard too much of that since the kind of initial start to the new Hearthstone year a few months ago. So this is kind of the first information we're getting more about that. And it's pretty interesting. So we're going to just read on through here, and then I'm going to talk about my thoughts about the information we got, because it's pretty interesting. So we're going to get right into it. Before we do, if you like this kind of content, do remember to like and subscribe. There's a ton to help out the channel and keeps the Mercenaries videos coming. So let's dive right on into it here. So we can see this question was asked by user ArcDustBunny, and they asked, the quote-unquote big moment for Mercenaries was teased around mini set time. What's the time frame for that? The coin issue is very demoralizing, to be honest. And I'm sure that's a statement that resonates with a lot of people. So let's take a look at what was said here. So XR said, not sure what this tease is referring to, but our additional feature plans for Mercenaries are still a ways out. At least 6 months, though we do have content drops before that. So when I saw this, I felt like I had to kind of ask for a little bit of clarification here, and I actually put a little picture here from their Year of the Hydra thing, where this is basically what the prior person was asking about when they mentioned throughout the year, team has plans for the excess coins, the endgame system, improvements to task, and so on. So I wanted to ask, does this mean extra coins in the PvE endgame are no longer expected this year, like they previously mentioned, or was he kind of referring to some other features unrelated to those? So we did get a response, so I was quite happy we got some information. So still unsure, we'd like to ship as soon as possible, but still some design work is necessary before we start locking everything in. Our hope is that we'll have most of the feature work done by the end of the year, but it's likely it will spill into early next year. That said, there will be updates along the way. So this is quite some news. This is definitely some news, because if you've been following the content that I've been doing, I've been kind of having a theory that I really thought October would really be the time that most of this stuff would be coming, and they would treat it as kind of a soft relaunch for the mode to try and get more new people into it, get people who maybe didn't like it at launch to come back, as it feels like that's something this mode really needs. And especially if we look at the marketing that was done for this game around launch and how it disappeared into nothing almost completely afterwards, to me, that always spoke to, they know there are these fundamental issues with the game, and they know that it doesn't make sense to try and get people to play the game when there are still problems and is not really realized the full vision or the full potential of what it can be. And obviously excess coins and PvE endgame and that kind of stuff is a very core part of what is missing there in a lot of players and my own opinions. So first off, we'll just talk about this a little bit. Now personally, obviously I would have preferred this this coming when I was initially hoping for it. I thought October would have been a good time. However, after thinking about it a little bit more, I'm kind of okay as long as it doesn't turn into like a repeated cycle of delays, basically. Because I would much rather them take an extra, let's say we were talking October, so an extra 2-3 months to basically make sure that when this comes out, it is a fully realized and developed thing, rather than what we got at launch. And I think that's a really great comparison for this, because I think a core problem with Mercenaries was it launched in such kind of a half-baked state, and that really put a lot of people off and left a sour taste in their mouth right from the get-go. And that's why I think a lot of people, especially bigger creators, that's one of the big reasons they didn't stick around. It didn't feel like, at least to me, what I saw on the advertising and what I saw when I played the game myself before I figured out all the PvP stuff, it really didn't line up. And I know a lot of people definitely felt kind of burned by that, because a lot of people kind of got that FOMO from the marketing, ended up putting in $30, $50, $100 into pre-orders, and then never really ended up doing very much with the mode because they found out it wasn't their cup of tea, or it just wasn't, even if they liked the idea behind it, it wasn't fully realized, and it was overly grindy, and there were a lot of flaws with it. And a lot of those flaws have been notably improved on over time. The game has come quite a long way with some very important features and changes. And we can see that in new players coming back for events, or the biggest thing, the task change. Now, in my opinion, if they were smart about it, that task change would have come shortly after launch, when everyone was upset at them for nerfing the air elemental. I think it was a huge mistake to take that away and then not do anything to replace it or make it better for players until months later. I think that was a huge miss, and I really don't want the PvE endgame and the excess coin stuff, because they're very clearly tied to each other, to have that experience. I would much rather wait until, let's say, December, January, maybe even February at the latest, if it's early in the new year. I would much rather wait that bit of extra time and have them actually get it right the first time than have it come out in, say, October and then needing them to fix it 3 months later. Because I think when these features get added, it is a very big time for the mode. And as we saw in their writing, and as the original question asked about, the big moment for Mercenaries, I think that's what this is going to be. But you need to get it right, because if they whiff on the PvE endgame or the excess coin solution, I think you're going to see people be more unhappy than they have ever been. And we've had some pretty unhappy times along the road. So personally, I think it's better that they take this time if it means they actually get it right the first time, rather than releasing something kind of half-baked like we saw at launch and then working over time to fix it and make it right. I think that's the wrong approach. I think that is not how you get a lot of new people or bring back old people. And so even though it's not exactly what I wanted to hear, I'm kind of okay with it. Now, part of that stems from the fact that I am a PvP player. I would not be surprised that those of you who are PvE focused people are going to be more upset about this, because obviously there's a bit less for you to do in the meantime, and that sucks. And I mean, from the start, I've been saying PvE has needed a lot of work, and it still does. It's gotten better. There have been improvements with it. I've liked a lot of the new bounties. They feel more rewarding with the coins and the new task system and the kind of the new Mercenaries tasks being quicker. It has improved in quite a significant way over time. Comparing to some of the early launches, my experience of grinding the new Mercenaries to this last one, it's night and day. grinding this new drop, despite it being more mercenaries than we have ever gotten, has probably been the most enjoyable time I've had with grinding them. Whereas in some of the prior drops, it could get very grating and just, it would wear on you. Because the grinding was not enjoyable if you were trying to be efficient. And as someone who focuses on PvP, I'm not playing PvE to just play the PvE. I'm playing to get my characters up so I can use them in PvP. So there have been improvements along the way, but I think the big thing is they really need to get this right on the first shot. So if that means it takes a bit longer than they initially expected, I think it's better they do that than try to rush it out like we got at launch and then have to fix it later. Because ultimately, it's the same thing, except it's worse because that ends up kind of leaving a sour taste in people's mouth all over again, and it would really kind of blow the opportunity of bringing in new players and bringing back old players. So even though it's not what I wanted to hear, I think it will be okay, as long as they get it right on the first time. It's a big if, but we still don't know anything about what the endgame PvP entails or what they're doing with these excess coins, other than that it will probably be related to that in some way. So we just have to wait and see on that one. But I did want to cover this because at least we got some information. Because they could have just as easily not said anything about this till later on in the year, and I think that would have been much worse. I think that if we got this information quite a ways down the road, especially closer to the next Mercs drop, when people had more expectations of maybe that's when we get the endgame PvE, like myself and a lot of other members in the community were theorizing, I think it would have been met with a much more negative response because our expectations would have been different. So I think it's very important to communicate stuff like this, and I'm glad they did it, even if it's not necessarily the thing people wanted to hear. So those are kind of my thoughts about the PvE endgame stuff and whatnot being a little bit further away than we had initially expected. It's not the greatest thing in the world. I wish it didn't have to be that way, but it is what it is, and if it does end up resulting in a more complete and polished product by the time it actually does come out, I think it is worth it. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about with all this stuff. I am curious what people think about this, so do let me know in the comments. But that's not the only thing we're going to take a look at today, but that is kind of the bigger thing. But speaking of communication and stuff like that, we actually got some insight on the recent balance changes and the buffs that we recently got in the most recent patch. So I wanted to take a look at those too, because I think that is really important. And again, this is the kind of communication I really like and hope to see more of in the future, as I think it goes a long way to helping the community get a better understanding of where the developers are at with different parts of the mode. In this case, balance related to PvP. So let's take a look. So this was and I'll have links in the description. These are both in the XR thread, but I'll have links in the description if you want to read through these yourselves. My initial question in the AMA was, in the recent update, we saw some great mercs get buffed. I'm curious what goes into the decision-making when buffs are considered. Yulon felt like a clear, better Valera answer, but for more subtle changes like the HP buffs or smaller adjustments, what makes a merc considered for buffs? And Tess here, one of the developers working on Mercenaries, was kind enough to give a pretty deep and insightful thread on this. So we're going to kind of go through it and talk about things a little bit. So I'm just going to read on through. So she championed the balance patch when she heard that we had the opportunity to make one. Started with drafting up ideal changes and sending it to the lead designer. After feedback, went through some reworks and back and forth several times until they arrived at the current version we got. Throughout the process, many changes were completely denied for various reasons. There were also a lot of changes that were decided would need more time to efficiently implement, so they were considered a "we can do this later" potentially option. They ended up going with the current list after removing changes that fell under either criteria. So we're going to take a look at the insights behind the ones we got. But before we do that, I think it is interesting to note that it sounds like there will be more changes coming, but due to the structure of the patch we got, it being a kind of balance-focused update, that made, or for the other formats, I should specify. The big thing about this update was, even though Merc's got some stuff in it, this update was very clearly targeted at mainly standard and constructed, as they got a ton of nerfs. More than I can remember seeing in any recent history. So because of that, the patch, it's a little bit different how those patches are handled compared to major patches. Like the 0.4 patch we know is the mini set and the big Mercs drop, and this is, I think, 0.4, 0.3 or something. So there are limitations with that in terms of what they are able to do, because I believe these patches are done in a shorter time span as they're reacting to data. So they can't do them kind of further in advance like is typically done for the larger updates and content patches. So let's take a look here though. Alex Straza, Dragon Queen's Gambit, going from 2 to 1 cooldown. Honestly, this ability should just be 0 cooldown, but decided to keep it at 1 because the equipment that makes it 1 speed. Most of the time it's dealing less damage than Dragon's Breath. Yeah, I agree with this entirely. I think, yeah, the equipment making it 1 is probably why it would be a little too ridiculous at 0 cooldown, but I think 1 was a kind of happy medium and is what it should have originally been at launch, so big fan of that change. Lich King, this one I thought was really particularly interesting to get some insight on. So Death Coil going from 1 to 0 cooldown. Pre-launch, this ability was 4 speed and had no cooldown. It seemed pretty fine in PvP that way, but it was nerfed because it was pretty strong when enemies used it in PvE. And we have seen that, actually. Trigor is a great example of this. I believe it's Veilastraz is the boss that uses Trigor's Backlash. And when Trigor got that ability buff to be significantly stronger, well, as we all know, really crazy ability, now that PvE fight is significantly harder. So I do think this sheds kind of interesting light on the fact that some of these changes, you know, it's not as simple as, is the ability balanced or okay for PvP? It also has to factor in that these abilities are used in PvE encounters, and that can have bigger ramifications. But she mentioned since then we've almost doubled the amount of mercenaries released, so the chance of encountering any single mercenary in PvE is much lower. The frequency of fights against collectible mercenaries in PvE were also reduced pre-launch, but after the Death Coil nerf. So that kind of also shows that, you know, we fight these mercenaries in the bounties on the way up to the boss. So even if it's not a boss that has the ability, just the lower pool of mercenaries made it more common and more of an issue back then. Whereas we've pretty much doubled the pool of mercenaries by now, so it is less of an issue. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Yu'lon. So obviously my favorite change, and I think a lot of people's. Yu'lon going from 1 cooldown to 0 cooldown. This was made mostly to help reduce the impact of Valeera. 100%. It is definitely doing that. I didn't actually think it was going to be as impactful as it seemingly has been, but it's cool seeing mercenaries that were previously underplayed finally showing up. 100% agree. Yu'lon was a really great character. I really enjoy their kind of playstyle, and it's really great seeing them be more viable in more comps, like the fire comp from Wizard Beast, and even PvE. Now, honestly, Yu'lon is a very legitimate consideration for fire in PvE, which is really cool. So even though I think this is by far the strongest of the abilities, I'm really happy they went through with it, because it's just, it was a very needed thing, in my opinion, and it's going a long way towards making Valeera less impactful, which was the goal. So that's good. Tide Mistress. So Tide Mistress Athissa, Wave Crush going from speed 7 to speed 6, and then the cooldown going from 1 to 0 on Riptide. So Wave Crush was increased in speed to activate the Frost combo on Tidal Strike. So one of the other Nagas had a Frost combo ability, but there were no Nagas that you could actually combo it with, so you had to run an outside Frost unit. That kind of seemed strange to me from the beginning, so it's nice to see this change. Big fan of that. And then Riptide. Previously, there were multiple... Oh, talking about the Frost combo thing here. Previously, there were multiple abilities that were activating this Frost combo across the Nagas, but as their designs changed, those abilities were scrapped. This left the Naga with only one ability to activate this combo, so I wanted to rectify that. Great. I think that's awesome. Big fan of that. And then Riptide. Riptide just felt underpowered compared to similar options, specifically Jade Gust. Yeah, Jade Gust is really insane. Jade Gust deals 40 damage when one character attacks, while Riptide deals 20. Riptide has pros and cons compared to Jade Gust, but not enough pros where the cooldown seems justified. I agree. I think that that's pretty sound reasoning. So I'm happy to see that change. Maybe we will see the Nagas see a little bit more play because of this. Rexxar. So Rexxar gained 10 health, going from 1172 at max to 1182. Rexxar has been pretty frail, but nothing in his moveset really required him to be. If he's trying to get value off of Mama Bear Claws, he needs to be alive long enough to see more beasts summoned. So that makes sense. Obviously, I don't think this is going to propel Rexxar to be top tier in PvP by any means, but the character definitely can use all the help he could get, and this might be nice for those who want to use him in PvE as well. Zwen, this was a change that surprised me. Equalizing Strike going from speed 7 to speed 5, because Pounce is speed 4 and generally provides plus 15 attack, Equalizing Strike is almost never going to be used. Yep, that's very true. It would require making the ability something like 2 speed for it to close parierity, but it seems extremely dangerous on its own. I want to increase the speed to 5 regardless to make the niche situations where you want to use it over Pounce a little more common. That makes a lot of sense. Is this, much like Rexxar, is this going to propel the character to see a bunch of play? No, I do not think it is going to, but that doesn't mean I'm unhappy to get a change like this. This is a character that could probably use all the help it can get, so if you give it its probably most unused ability a little bit more fringe viability, it's never a bad thing. Captain Hooktusk. Cutthroat Negotiations going from speed 7 to speed 2. That is an insane speed increase. Hooktusk is just super slow, and that's hurting her overall playability. Yes, it definitely is. The pirates are very clearly balanced around the fact that Edwin can speed them up by 4, and I think that is why this character launched with so many slow speeds. There was a lot of fear around her when she was initially implemented because of role changing, but the many characters implemented since her can also change roles. The ability needs to be fast to both gain utility from it and for it to provide skill testing mind games. 100% agree about that. This kind of opens up what was, in my opinion, easily her worst ability to now having some kind of niche combo potential, whether you're using it on your opponent's mercenaries or on your own with the, I believe, the third item that gives you healing instead of bleeding. So I really like this change, and as someone who really liked the design of Hooktusk, I'm hopeful this will help it see more play in these kind of niche, interesting combo situations. Then Uther. Uther, Blessing and Protection going from speed 3 to speed 1. There are bigger plans for Uther, but this is the only change that made it in this patch. This one was mainly a change to just tighten up the usability of the taunt. Yep, 100%. I mean, this is kind of launch merc syndrome, right? The speeds were very clearly balanced around different numbers at launch, and that changed over time pretty significantly. As we saw with Valeera, we were getting a lot more 1 and 0 speeds, and so getting this down to speed 1, I think, is pretty much the least you can do to help make it maybe a viable thing. It sounds like Uther is going to get some more changes in the future, which I very much welcome, because I think even with this change, he is kind of an underwhelming character, which is a shame, but clearly they want to do more holy support stuff. But like I said, there were very clearly some limitations with what could be included in this patch versus what had to be saved for a little bit down the road in a bigger patch. So I hope we'll see kind of some more of those changes that didn't make it into this one in the next one. And then, so overall, the number one thing that she was aiming for was to make players have a bit more fun while playing these characters. She knew she could not create the perfect meta with this change list, but she pushed for doing something to make the players happier. If someone playing with Rexxar loves having 10 more health, then it was worth just giving Rexxar 10 more health. And yeah, I agree with that. Like, I mean, I've seen kind of a common critique or complaint or whatever that, well, Rexxar getting 10 more health really doesn't make him this all-star character, and that's true. He's not going to become a A-tier character off the bat of just getting 10 more HP, but I don't think every character needs buffs like that. And it's also kind of dangerous sometimes to implement much more sweeping changes, and we've seen this in the past. It's kind of a careful what you wish for scenario, right? Because there are a handful of buffs that I think ended up over-delivering. I mean, we talked in the past about buffing Trigor, because Trigor saw absolutely no play in his original form, and the monkey's paw curled, and he destroyed the meta for 2 months, and is still a very relevant part of it, even if it's not 100% warped around him like it was in the prior meta. So you do have to be careful with buff changes. I mean, we even saw that at launch with the Grom buff. Grom was almost useless, and then all it took was giving him his ability down to 2 speed and a few new characters coming along, and all of a sudden he was one of the top played mercenaries for months on end. He ended up inspiring an archetype, GVT, Grom Valera Thrall, that was hugely dominant for a large period of time, even though we don't really see it much now today because things have changed a bunch. So I do think that is something that does have to be considered, is you have to be careful with buffs, because nobody wants Trigor 2.0, and I don't think obviously any of these buffs are giving us that. I think the closest thing is Yu'lon in terms of power level, but I think it's nowhere near as dangerous and unhealthy for the game as the initial Trigor buff was. I think it's a lot more reasonable, and it helps promote a playstyle which has been kind of neglected in Mercenaries, which is a kind of slower, more attrition-y style of keeping your units alive. Mercenaries has traditionally gone in the direction of this hyper-aggression and hyper-damage, because you're trying to kill your opponent's mercs so they can't act, and then you can win the game. But I think it suits the game better if there is a variety of strategies in the archetypes, and I think the Yu'lon change in particular is a very good step in the right direction for that. So I just wanted to go over this. I really like all the changes we got, and from my understanding, it sounds like that there will be more changes in the future. This isn't all we're going to get. There was another one here. Let me see if I can find it really quick. Here it is. So somebody asked, Adam Noodleman here asked, I'm curious, what were some of the changes that did not make it in? It's interesting to see the ideas being bounced around. And she said, I don't want to say because I don't want to disappoint anyone who would have liked those changes. That's pretty fair, especially ones that might be more discussed by the community. Yeah, I'm sure some of the stuff we have talked about in the community has come up. Hopefully, some of these buffs will see the light of day sometime soon. So yeah, I really like that, and I hope we see more buffs, because a lot of these, especially the launch mercenaries, have what I call launch mercenary syndrome, where they were very clearly balanced around the game being in a very different state than it is right now, and it doesn't take very much to get some of these characters from useless to playable, and I think that's a net positive for the whole game, because it's basically like adding new content without actually having to develop new content. And a great example of that is Tyrande, where she was completely useless. Didn't see play anywhere, PvE, PvP, nothing. And all it took was one significant buff, and all of a sudden she is a mainstay right next to Long Jin as a very meta-defining and powerful bench character. So they didn't need to add a new character to fill that kind of role. They just had to make some tweaks and adjustments to a previously established character who wasn't seeing enough play because they just weren't powerful enough to justify their use. And I hope we see more of that with more of these launch mercenaries like Uther, like the demons, like Murlocs, and more. So yeah, that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about. There was another kind of little interaction talked about with another member on the team about Onyxia specifically, as I know one critique I have had of Onyxia has been she's a really cool character, but it feels like she's so frail that she hasn't really gotten to see much play. At 65 base HP, 70 if she's max, she just dies so quickly, and I think because of that, she's really only seen some fringe usage in PvP and PvE. And apparently, Onyxia used to be much, much stronger in kind of the development stages. Her fire scaling and AoE stuff seemed to be a lot more strong. So because of that, it seemed they balanced her HP around that, making her more of a glass cannon that could deal crazy damage, but didn't have very high survivability. So you had to be careful with how you used her. But because a lot of those kind of development ideas changed along the way and didn't make it to live when the character came out, it seems reasonable that Onyxia could do with a little bit of a buff in terms of survivability. So Charles was the one who mentioned that. He's one of the kind of balance specialists who does a lot of testing and whatnot. So I did want to mention that as well because I thought that was very interesting, and I hope we do see a buff for Onyxia in the near future, or just at all, because she's a really cool character, and I think just giving her a little bit more survivability would do basically like what I was saying before, allow a character who is really cool and interesting to really shine and give us a more viable character to mess around with in both PvE and PvP. So I thought this was really interesting stuff, so I wanted to talk about it, just kind of get my thoughts and opinions out there, especially on the delay. Oh, I don't even know if I want to call it a delay. I mean, I guess that is kind of what it is, because it sounds like it's not going to be coming this year with the Endgame coin stuff. But I wanted to talk about that especially because I know that is on the forefront of a lot of people's minds. My kind of thing is I'm focused on PvP, so if the PvP is good, I'm okay waiting a bit longer. So far, in my experience, I've really been liking the PvP. It is infinitely better than what it was before the patch. And I'm referring to the more so the main big mercs drop, but also these buffs on top of it. There's so much variety on ladder. I feel like I have a wide variety of choices that I can compete with and mess around with, which is my favorite thing about Mercenaries. So as long as PvP stays in a reasonable state and things are adjusted if anything becomes more problematic like it was in the past, I think it's okay. I think it's okay if we have to wait a little bit longer than initially expected. But obviously, that's coming from a PvP-focused player. And I know it's going to be a little rougher for our PvE crowd, but hopefully the content we get in between then, including the events, new bounties, all that stuff, will help kind of hold us over until we really get those more desired systems. So that's going to do it for this video. Definitely let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on both that as well as the changes and the insight behind them. And again, the links will be in the description if you want to check out these threads yourself. But yeah, that's going to do it for this one. If you enjoyed it, do remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.